Let's just dive right into this. If you've stepped into a bookstore, scrolled through social media for even 5 minutes, or really paid any attention to pop culture lately, you've definitely seen the massive cultural footprint of Colleen Hoover's deeply emotional novel, It Ends With Us. So today, in this explainer, we're going to really unpack this phenomenon. We'll be looking closely at the story's emotional depth, the character psychology, and the central themes that have literally captivated millions of people.
And that brings us to a fascinating question, which is really the core of our journey today. Why exactly did a book about domestic violence become the biggest romance novel of the decade? I mean, it's a pretty jarring juxtaposition, right? Well, we're going to discover how a story that was marketed, packaged, and initially perceived as this straightforward, breezy romance is in reality a deeply complex exploration of trauma.
I mean, the numbers really just speak for themselves here. It Ends With Us wasn't just a hit. It was literally the #1 best-selling novel of both 2022 and 2023. This explosive resurgence was largely fueled by book talk, and it eventually led to a major 2024 film adaptation starring Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. It truly became a global conversation.
All right, moving into Section 1, Beyond the Romance Phenomenon.
So, on the surface, the setup feels like a completely classic romantic trope. You have this quirky young woman named Lily Bloom who dreams of opening a floral shop, and she meets Ryle Kincaid, this brilliant, incredibly charming neurosurgeon. But beneath that brightly colored, inviting cover is a really unflinching exploration of generational trauma and abuse. The initial setup masterfully draws readers right into the illusion of a perfect romance, before hitting them with some much heavier, darker truths.
Let's look at Section 2, The Illusion of Perfection.
Early on, Ryle Kincaid seems like, well, the absolute ideal partner. He's assertive, he's successful, and he's capable of these grand, sweeping romantic gestures. But as we see, this early commitment and intense charm actually mask some really deep-seated issues. And the narrative brilliantly mirrors reality here, showing how readers, much like victims of abuse in the real world, can get completely swept up in the honeymoon phase, They end up totally blinded to the red flags that are subtly being planted all around them. But then the psychological dynamics between Lily and Ryle quickly begin to reveal those warning signs. You start to see this struggle for power, intense jealousy, and a possessiveness that begins to crack that perfect illusion. And what's important is that the novel doesn't just show the violence. It unmasks the deep-seated causes of abuse and the incredibly confusing, often paralyzing emotional responses of those who are trapped within it.
Which brings us to Section 3, Echoes of Childhood Trauma.
An absolutely crucial point here is understanding Lily's background. Through her old teenage journals, which, interestingly, she wrote as letters to talk show host Ellen DeGeneres, we learn her darkest secret. She writes, "My father was abusive, not to me, to my mother." Lily grew up watching her father physically abuse her mom. This led her to deeply resent him and, crucially, to resent her mother for staying. These journal entries kind of separate her past trauma from her present reality, though. As we'll see, the two are dangerously close to colliding.
Those same journals also introduce us to her first love, Atlas Corrigan. Atlas was a formerly homeless teenager that Lily actually helped protect, and he represents safety, healing, and overcoming trauma. He managed to turn his life around and become a successful chef. Ryle, on the other hand, represents passion, sure, but also danger, and the terrifying repetition of the cycle of abuse. So Atlas really provides this stark counterpoint to Ryle's volatile behavior.
Let's dive into Section 4, The Cycle of Abuse.
The book portrays a terrifying structural realism when it comes to abuse. It always starts with charm, moves into tension, and then erupts in violence. For instance, the very first time Ryle hurts Lily, he burns his hand on a casserole, she laughs because she's a little tipsy, and he violently shoves her. Later on, driven by this intense jealousy over finding Atlas's phone number, he actually pushes Lily down a flight of stairs. And immediately after these outbreaks, we hit step 4, the begging, the crying, and the frantic apologies.
And this introduces a massive psychological trap known as explaining away violence. After pushing her, Ryle confesses a horrific childhood trauma, that as a 6-year-old he accidentally shot and killed his own brother, Emerson. He claims this is what leads to his uncontrollable bouts of rage. And Lily, out of this deep, genuine empathy and love, internalizes his tragic excuse. She starts justifying the abusive behavior, viewing it as a medical or psychological panic rather than malice, which, tragically, minimizes his accountability and keeps her trapped in the relationship.
Now let's look at Section 5, the controversy and criticism.
So it's worth noting that the novel's critical reception has been deeply divided. On one hand, many readers heavily praise its immense emotional resonance and its ability to raise real awareness for domestic violence through a very relatable protagonist. But on the flip side, critics argue it blurs the line by romanticizing toxic tropes. Some readers feel Ryle's childhood trauma is used way too simplistically to just excuse his behavior, and that Atlas is portrayed as this idealized savior, which they argue undermines Lily's own independent agency.
Another really major point of contention was the marketing itself. The book, and subsequently the 2024 film adaptation, were largely marketed to the public as straightforward romances. That brightly colored cover, it completely lacked any trigger warnings for domestic violence or sexual assault. Because of this, many audiences who picked it up expecting a typical, lighthearted romance were completely shocked and frankly caught off guard by the very dark, heavy material inside. But despite the controversies surrounding it, the novel undeniably acts as a mirror, forcing society to confront some really hard truths. It directly challenges that common and often very judgmental question of, well, why didn't she just leave? By showing firsthand the paralyzing mix of love, fear, shame, and hope that makes leaving an abusive relationship incredibly complex and extremely dangerous.
Okay, Section 6, Breaking the Generational Cycle.
The absolute emotional crux of the story comes after a horrific assault by Ryle that leaves Lily battered and, she discovers, pregnant. She has this completely devastating moment of clarity, thinking to herself, I am my mother. It's the ultimate turning point. Lily recognizes she is now trapped in the exact same dynamic she spent her whole entire life resenting her mother for enduring. She finally realizes that absolutely no amount of love or forgiveness is going to change Ryle's nature.
And to truly understand the gravity of this realization, we have to look at the author's note at the end of the book. This fictional narrative is heavily grounded in reality. It's a deeply personal story, inspired by Colleen Hoover's own parents and her earliest memories of her father abusing her mother. Hoover actually stated it was the hardest thing she's ever written, but she wrote it to put herself in her mother's shoes, ultimately honoring her mom's immense strength and resilience.
In the aftermath of everything, Lily gives birth to a daughter, whom she names Emerson, after Ryle's late brother. Holding her newborn, Lily makes her final, heartbreaking choice. She demands a divorce. She requires Ryle to attend anger management and tells him he can only have supervised visits. She makes the active choice to prioritize her daughter's physical and emotional safety over her own very complex love for Ryle, proving once and for all that leaving an abuser requires an unimaginable amount of courage. And this leads us to the most powerful moment in the entire narrative. Speaking directly to her newborn daughter, Lily delivers the titular line. It stops here, with me and you. It ends with us. It represents the ultimate triumph of self-respect and accountability. She is making an active, incredibly painful, but absolutely necessary choice to ensure that the generational trauma stops with her and is not passed down to her child.
As we wrap up this explainer, this is really the ultimate takeaway. The story challenges all of our preconceptions of romance and victimhood, leaving us with the profound realization, sometimes, the bravest act of love is in staying. It's choosing to end a cycle of pain rather than continue it. So, it leaves us with something to think about. What cycles in our own society, or maybe even in our own lives, require that exact same level of bravery to break?